Welcome to our webinar on DPDP Rules. Thank you so much for giving us time and joining us today. So as we step into 2026, conversations around data in India have shifted fundamentally. We are no longer talking about data security in a traditional sense, but more in the realm of how can we operate in a landscape which is being governed by Digital Personal and Data Protection Act. So now, for every organization that is represented here today, the rules are no longer a distant concept. They are now active, and we have to figure out how to operationally uh, utilize these rules so that we are compliant. Now, whether you are a CISO, a DPO, or a business leader, the question has fundamentally changed from what is the law to how can we actually comply without breaking our existing workflows. At Meteonic, our journey so far has been focused on securing code and securing your applications. But as we've consulted with more and more companies, we've realized that privacy compliance is often a messy and manual high risk process. Compliance isn't really just about a privacy policy on your website, it's also about consent management, data mapping, responding to data principal requests in real time, and managing all of this within the constraints of the rules. This is why I'm very excited to be joined here today by our partners from Privy by Idify. We were looking for a partner that would help DPDPA compliance automation with organizations that can, make these processes very simple and instead of just giving a platform and it'll give you an automation engine which is built specifically in the Indian landscape so that the gap between legal requirements and technical execution can be fulfilled. um, so before we can begin, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Nikhil. He is our product expert from Privy. And over to you, man. Looking forward to your inputs.
Uh,
Okay, seems like we're
Hello,
having
Abhishek.
some
Can
kind
you
of
hear me
technical
now?
issue. Yeah, audible now.
Thanks, Rahul. I think yes, I was unable to unmute myself. Just sort of IT challenges, and apologies for this. And thank you, Rahul, for the opportunity. Thank you, Team Meteonic, to allow us this privilege to sort of present this webinar. I'd like to introduce myself very quickly. I'm Nikhil. I work in the capacity of a principal product manager here at Privy by Identify, which is a full stack data privacy and governance sort of compliance platform that helps enterprises become compliant with the DPDP Act, and not just become compliant, actually take a step further in sort of really elevating privacy postures for organizations, right? Uh, in that breath, I think we'll get going today, and to I think apologies for missing the first few minutes, but we'll try to make the most use of our time to cover a couple of key concepts. We'd love to do a quick double click into how the rules that have just dropped about 2 months back, what do they mean for you as enterprises. We'll try to unpack some of those rules and look at what does this mean from a timeline perspective. We will also look at what the next, I mean, while 18 is what the rules say, we are 2 months down. So, what do the next 16 months look like, and what are sort of some do's and don'ts from some of our early experience with some enterprises who've embarked on this journey with us. And towards the end, we'll look at a little glimpse of what the Privy by Identify platform does, as well as sort of understand few sort of functional and sort of structural differences between the concept of a consent manager and consent management system. This again is a, I would say, largely misunderstood piece of the puzzle, which I think will be helpful if we are able to unpack this for the audience, right? With that, it would be great to get kick started. The vantage point that we bring, and if we'd love to go to the next slide if possible, the vantage point that I'm today joined by Aman, who's a colleague of mine, and he'll take the reins in a bit. Our vantage point has been obviously nuanced understanding of personal or digital personal data in this country, having been in existence for about 14 years as IDFI, and the privy offering has been in the making much before the bill had become an act. And I've personally been part of this ecosystem, contributed to the DPDP rules and the act over the last 2.5 years, as well as Privy now being a participant and finalist in the NEGD uh, code for consent challenge, right? And this is sort of our unique vantage point, given that we've had a ringside view of early adopters as they've embarked on this technology transformation. We've seen this through, and would love to share some learnings that we've gathered, right? uh, if I were to look back in the last 18-24 months, I've possibly spoken to about 300 or 500 odd data protection officers, CISOs, CTOs, and some of those learnings I'd love to sort of dispel as we go along, right? uh, Coming to the DPDPA rules, obviously they are almost like an addendum to the DPDP Act itself that had come in August of 2023. 3rd of Jan is when the draft version of these rules were released, and as of 14th of November, or actually 13th November night, is when the counter for all organizations has really begun. Right? And as we go to the next slide, we'll realize that there are parts of the rules that are sort of live already. There are some parts that will come through in about a year's time, which is the definition of a consent manager and the licensing regime around it. And then there are some requirements which are all fiduciary facing requirements that come through by May of 2027, which is that 18-month window that, uh, you know, what do I say, in terms of the requirements that are obligations for the data fiduciary itself. Right. So as you can see, we have a sort of a packed agenda. We'd love to keep this session interactive. So please drop in your questions, any questions that you might have along the way. We'd love to sort of rope that into the agenda, and definitely we'll try to keep about 10 minutes at the end to look at Q&A in person. A shareable version of this deck will be made available post the webinar, and we'd love to share that across. So feel free, and I think the team will reach out and share a shareable version of this deck. Yeah. Just moving on, if I look at double clicking into the DPDPA rules on the next slide, we'll look at, like I said, there are three sections. There are parts of the rules that are now live, which means that the Data Protection Board has been now announced. We know for a fact that it's going to be chaired by four people. It is also common knowledge now that the website which was in the works, right? So DPB will operate digitally, and that website is soon to be released. The four office bearers will be announced. Something to watch out for in the in the budget that is expected at the end of this month will also be how much money gets apportioned for the upkeep and the maintenance of this digital office of the data protection board. And I'll keep an eye out for that. And I think if we were to look at, the higher that amount is, probably the more serious the government and the data protection board proceedings will be like, right? If I look at the right hand side, which is the 13th of May 2027, a lot of the mandates which are fiduciary facing, right, which are, we call them the obligations of data fiduciaries, is what we'd like to unpack as we go forward. But for the audience who might be new to the data protection world and these definitions, on the next slide, we have a very sort of simplistic example of what these definitions mean. And if we go to the next slide, Rahul, thank you. I'd like to very quickly talk about the four definitions that the DPDP Act really talks about, right? So, in a classical example, as we interacted sort of with businesses, we are the data principal, which is citizens of this country whose personal data is being processed for sort of delivering products and services to us, right? Who's a data fiduciary? He is a, I would say, this entity or this organization that defines the means and purposes of processing of our data, right? So, in the classical sense, think of a bank, think of a automotive organization, think of some of these organizations that you represent today are all data fiduciaries, given they define the means and the purpose of processing this data, right? Now comes the alternate entity, which is the data processor, which is acting on behalf of a data fiduciary. So let's say this bank or this automotive company outsources the onboarding process to somebody, outsources the, look at the servicing part from automotive side. If I take a classical retailer example, there are going to be vendors behind, right, that help you do sort of delivery of products, right? Third party logistics. There are going to be vendors who do, SMSs and emails and WhatsApps for you, right? Which is like the haptics and the gupshops of the world, right? There could be an email management software, right? All of these entities typically, by definition, will fall under the data processor category. Now, having said that, the nuance of fiduciary and processor is something that really looks at it's a use case based sort of a definition, right? So you can't really paint everybody with the same sort of a cloud provider is a data processor. An organization that is processing, and I would urge you to look up the definition of processing as per the DPDP Act. There are about 11 things that come in it, right? So which is storage of data, which is doing some algorithmic math on that data, transferring data from point A to point B. All of those are looking at processors, right? So yes, IT organizations will largely become data processors. But in the example, and I'm looking at the chat, the moment this IT organization, right, if there is personal data that it is processing as part of a contract, right, the moment they start doing anything additional, right, which is, let's say, the IT contract was to do payroll processing, right, from an HR standpoint, right? But the moment you potentially reach out to the people who you have processed payroll for to then, let's say, serve an additional product capability that you've built, right, or you start training a machine learning model which is not part of your arrangement with your fiduciary, right, you trip into the data fiduciary world yourself, right? And therefore I would urge you to go back and look at your settings and say, hey, am I a pure play fiduciary or a processor? Or do I straddle between these definitions? And that will be largely the case, right? So even in this example that you see, the fiduciary could be a bank. And let's take, if I look at even the, you are all familiar most likely with the Swiggy HDFC credit card, right? Which some of us are customers of. And there again, there is two fiduciaries in that fray, right? There's Swiggy, which collects personal data and processes for their own purposes, and similarly HD for that matter as well, right? So that's a slightly different example, and wanted to just make people aware of the definitions of fiduciary and processors. Uh, Turns out the DPDP Act is a little different than the GDPR world, because your fines and your obligations are all dished out for the fiduciary. Therefore, the burden of proof for compliance lies with the fiduciary entity, and enforcing the guardrails and the controls onto your processors. And in the diagram you could see there's a card management software, there is a KYC provider, there is a CPAS provider. All of those become processors for you, and therefore enforcing the right controls becomes part of the fiduciary's mandate there. I'm going to now go on to the next slide and talk about what are these fiduciary obligations very quickly, and then we'll go forward from there, right? So, number one is being able to, in the right timelines, collect consent from your data principals. These data principals could be your employees, data principals could be your end users, and there are two parts to this, right? There are going to be uh, you know customers who are existing, so think of those as your existing stock customers, but there will be new customers coming through, right? So across new and old customer bases, across data principles, across various types, we need to figure out whether, one, we need to collect that consent, and if required, how do we do that in a manner through what is called a privacy notice or a consent notice, right? The notice construct is, again, from a DPDP perspective, becomes one of the primary ways or legal basis for collecting or processing personal data. This, again, one more difference from the GDPR world is, in GDPR there are five alternate ways that you could collect personal data from, right? But in the DPDP world, it's either notice and seek consent, or it's legitimate use, which is very narrowly carved out, right? So there are purposes like employment, there are purposes like the sovereignty of this country, state, and ensuring that there is no fraud happening. Those are scenarios where the legal basis could be legitimate use. But other than that, right, it's largely painted through the notice and consent methodology, right? Now, coming to the concept of notice, and we'd love to show you towards the end what a notice looks like. The notice is expected to be an itemized sort of a list of PII and purposes that you showcase to this customer, right? So today, you and I are very familiar with a single checkbox, consented to our personal data being used at the right granularity, with the concept of what we like to call purpose limitation, right? Now, if I were to explain purpose limitation to you, it means, let's take a combination of PII and purposes, which is, let's say, the phone number that you are going to use to do a KYC verifiers, versus the phone number that you're going to use for sending marketing and promotional activity. Combination of phone number for the purpose, right, is where the DPDP Act forces us to now think about, right? So, if I were to sort of just read the act and look at implementation, I would say, how do I not just the collection of consent, but the collection, management, revocation, deletion, updation of consent is what the act and the rules force us to think about, right? And therefore, it becomes paramount importance to look at data principal rights. Now, we looked at the obligation of the fiduciary, which is to collect and manage consent at the right purpose limitation. It also speaks about languages, right? So again, the DPDP Act says that you need to collect consent in 22 different languages depending upon the customer's preference, right? This again is a very India and Bharat centric sort of use case. So how do you, one, make this happen? But two, how do you allow the principal to come back and ask for his rights, right? Now, these rights are right to access information, right to revocation, right to deletion, right to nominate other people, so on and so forth. And there are various scenarios. One could be parental, and also could be for a person with disabilities. How do you sort of pass on that ownership of your personal data and your consent? So children below the, and defined as the age of 18. So in case you are interacting with people below 18, you need to collect consent from their parent or their legal guardian, right? Coming to data retention and purging guidelines, it also specifies the onus that post the time for which you have collected that data, right? That purpose of let's say doing marketing and reach outs has to be time bound, right? For various industries, they talk about a 3-year period. for various industries, it talks about when the purpose gets met, you need to now delete that data or go back to your customer and within 48 hours of deletion, actually extend that consent that you have collected from them. Right? There are various scenarios there. But again, what this forces us to really think about is I might actually be sitting on a bunch of personal data which I am using for various purposes. Unless I have full visibility into this world, it's going to be hard to put in the right controls in place. And lastly, if I look at, even the grievances that customers or principals that I'm linked to will come and ask me, there is a timeline given to say within 90 days you need to ensure that you are able to resolve the right ticket. Otherwise, they're going to take you to the data protection board, right? And the board is anyway going to come knocking for audits, for complaints that are going to be dished out for you because you've not sort of met the obligations that the DPA is forcing you to think about. With that, I'll move on to sort of the next slide. I think before I move to the next slide, there's a point around fines. So in case you don't meet your obligations, there are fines that are getting dished out and they go up to the tune of 250 crores, right? So now if I put myself in your shoes, which is of an enterprise hat, and if I look at what I need to be doing in the next 18 months, that's when, as you go to the next slide, that there are about five core things that you need to do, right? Number one is like we discussed. Thanks, Rahul. The first one is to understand where we might lie, right? Which is what are my gaps? Am I a fiduciary? Am I a processor? Where am I collecting PI information, right? What are my touch points? Am I doing this purely a digital flow? Is there physical data which might get digitized later? So, one of the key aspects is also look at this as a Digital Personal Data Protection Act, right? Which means any data that is digital, right? So even if it's physical at the point of collection, right, it becomes digitized at some point and the act becomes applicable, right? So understanding the baseline is number one. Number two is, like we discussed, there is a concept of a notice that we need want to show to our customers. How do we orchestrate that notice, right, in the right languages with the right purpose limitation to ensure that the customer has full transparency into his rights, so he can come back and ask for changes. Now, if I put a regulatory lens to this, right, and if you are from organizations where there might be alternate regulations that informs your interactions, you might still have to solve for this not just with the DPDPA lens alone. You will have to do this from a DPDPA plus your regulators lens. So depending upon if there is a, it's almost more like the stricter of the rules will apply, right? So you might still hold on to KYC data for 7 years if you're RBI associated, but you can't do marketing reach outs if the customer has changed their preferences or their consents, right? uh, Speaking of notice, as you construct the notice for these customers, one of the precursors for that would be to understand what kind of data of your customers you might be sitting on, right? And therefore, if I look at block number three, which is data governance, is the ability to understand what data you might be sitting on so that you can put the right guardrails in place, right? So if you today were to go and ask your enterprise, okay, and let's say you do, it's a retail outfit or an e-com player, for example. If you go and ask that e-com player what data they have on what part of your data they have with them and where is it lying across their ecosystem, it will be a hard challenge to solve, right? And therefore, understanding that baseline of data and then putting the right controls is going to be important. Right? This means discovery. This means classifying data internally. This means putting through a data lineage to understand where all data is leaving your ecosystem. Right. Brings me to the fourth block to say this is going to be outsourced to various third parties. Right. So understanding your third party data landscape, understanding who are these data processors, putting the right contractual obligations on them, and not just contract. There's going to be a redo of your contracts that you will do, but there's also going to be an enforcement of that. So when the regulator comes knocking, fiduciaries will force their processors to act appropriately, right, basis the data sharing agreement, and do this through some technology governance, right? So if I were in your place, I would go back today to see, hey, who are the third parties that I outsource to, or I might be a third party who's dealing with a fiduciary. Do I have a contract in place, and how can I go beyond the contract and enforce this and showcase proof of compliance? And that comes to the last block, which is doing compliance versus demonstrating compliance are two separate things. And one of the ideas around possibly doing this in the next 16 to 18 months will be focusing on demonstrability, right? To say, can I prove my consents in a court of law? Can I prove that I did all that I had to do in the 90-day period while resolving a grievance? Did I do all that was needed to ensure that the processor is also acting appropriately, right? So that, with that theme, these are I would say sort of five high level sort of steps that you need to take to get going. And on that note, if I go to sort of a quick double click into this, right, this could actually be broken down into sort of like three phases, right? um, if I were to sort of, I know this is a, I think we won't spend too much time here, but what I wanted to sort of leave the audience with is there is a phased approach of doing this. It involves some pre-work, but as soon as you get going, right, and we are almost 60-day mark, if I'm not wrong. uh, in the first 90 days we've got to get going and showcase some sort of minimum viable sort of a posture, right? And that may mean appointing a data protection officer. It may mean collecting consent appropriately in some of your digital journeys which are sort of mission critical or sort of important. It could mean getting kickstarted with this inventory of your third parties, right? And so that you could think of this as a dual sort of a nature, right? Imagine doing this internally in your org to gather the right sort of change management practices in place to win confidence, to say, hey, there are some quick wins, you managed to reach a certain point and therefore we need more involvement from various teams. Similarly, on the outside, right, you might want to signal to your customer base to say, hey, I take data privacy very seriously. In that 18-month charter, I've started figuring some things out. I've changed the way I look at notice. I've put a sort of a cookie banner in place, for example, right? So that could be step one, right? And then as you mature, there's almost like a across the maturity landscape, you'll see you could get better and better, right? So you may start collecting data principal requests through an email today, but over time you might port it into an automated way of doing this, right? You might orchestrate DPIs manually today. You might think of doing this in an automated technology led manner. And in the way that we look at this, we also see that there is people involvement, uh, there is a change in process that you will need to do, and then there's also technology enablement, and that's where we come in from a privy by identify perspective, right? And having seen this now at some of the early move organizations, we feel this is one of the approaches that really works, right? I will take a quick pause and we'll try to solve one or two questions, and then I'll pass it on to Sai to sort of
Yeah. Hey, Nikhil, there's a question. Are resigned employees also required for consent if we are keeping that data post their resignation?
yeah.
Yes, right. They would require consent specifically for this
Right.
when
So if I
using the
look at the
reg.
definition of the legitimate use piece, right? It's a little worded slightly. I would say there's a little bit of gray area here, right? The legitimate use is for employment purposes, right? Now, if we were to define our employment purpose to say that I will hold on to that data from an ex-employee database perspective, right? We might sail through, but classically, even if I look at employees, I you know uh, my employee contract potentially doesn't allow me to use employees pictures and do marketing on my website, for example, right? That could be a use case for which I definitely need consent because it's for a purpose which
Mhm.
is beyond legitimate use, right? So similarly, I think we would sort of, I think the definition of employment purpose, if that gets defined at an organizational level, and if that includes ex-employee from a data retention perspective, obviously from a BGV perspective and so on, you might not need consent. But it's great practice to do this. There are some B2B organizations that we are working with, and they seem to be wanting to use the personal data of their employees for a few purposes which classically do not fall under the employment purpose category, right? And therefore you might need consent. Is the way to look at this.
So we'll have to go against the definition of what you mean by compliance when it comes to this particular space. No simple answer
Yeah. So
here.
I think yeah, I think you'd rather, I would say, if you end up breaching that employee data in some manner, right? You would want to say that yes, you had expressed consent for it and it was part of your process and that is why you had it, for example, right? Or you are holding on to it because that person is actually going to go join somewhere else, and they might do a ref check, and therefore you need it for your records, and you can't delete it, but you will read it from some alternate place, right? So there is, I think, there's a lot to unpack even in that question, right? It's going to be different for everyone's use case, and you'd rather solve it from a, from a point of view to be able to demonstrate compliance, right? As you may
Hmm.
call it legitimate use, but you might have to show the proof to say this is legitimate use in your organization, and therefore you haven't collected consent, and you've only used it for legitimate uses, which is how the definition of employment purpose could be uh, created, right? Uh, yeah, with
Hmm.
that, I'd love to pass the baton on to Savan, who will take us through the rest of this. Over to you, Savan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over to you, Savan.
Savan, we are unable to hear you if you are speaking.
Yeah, am I audible right now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Great. So
awesome.
thanks,
Savan, if you could
Nikhil,
introduce
for
yourself as well, and then, yeah, that will be useful.
yeah. So I am Savan Kumar. I look after pre-sales and partnerships for this product of Privy in Idify. Been here close to 1 year now. This is a very interesting space to be in. The era of fiduciary is upon us. Rahul, can you go on to the next slide? Yes, thanks, Rahul. So, we understand DPDP has put in some sort of regulations in place, but to be very honest, this will go beyond compliance, right? We do have a lot of data that is being used for various purposes. Now, what DPDP Act does is forces us to do that in a very safeguarded or compliant sort of manner, right? So, this, as I say, goes beyond compliance to control. An organization should really have visibility into what sort of data what is the purpose that that data is going to be used for. Obviously, in a large enterprise organization, the data could be used for multiple purposes, could be used by multiple departments, right? Could be in various different silos. So from a product perspective or handling this compliance, we believe there is a need for an enterprise control tower that gives visibility for all of the stakeholders into the data ecosystem and obviously the consent ecosystem and the continuous compliance piece, right? All of these things need to work together, not in silos. Say, for example, when you
Hey,
my
Savan, there's a
data.
question. Can we address that? You don't mind?
Sure. Let me have a look.
Uh, hey, Bhaskar, you can unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, good
Am
afternoon.
I audible? Good
Yeah,
afternoon.
loud and clear.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is that suppose I am the application designer, so my application is of mine, but as of now there are many cloud providers. So people prefer to put their databases and host their applications on the cloud server, maybe
Right. Correct.
Azure cloud or something like that. So in case any mishap happens, who is liable? The cloud provider or the application provider?
So the law, I think, is very clear in this aspect. All of the obligations or the liabilities will lie on data fiduciaries, or in your case, an application provider, as you call it. So
Okay.
from
Okay.
a governance perspective, in order to avoid any sort of liabilities coming on to me as a data fiduciary, even though there is a lack of safeguard from the data processor's point of view, I have to ensure a number of things. First, I have to ensure that I have those contractual obligations in place, the contract between me and the vendor, right? There's a solid contract that guides all of these liabilities towards them. And even before getting into a contract, I have to do some sort of a due diligence or some check to ensure that this vendor or this data processors has all the security safeguards in place to store that sensitive personal data. So that's the way I
Mm-hmm.
think we look at it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, some other things can be, do you have a data processing agreement between the two parties, whether, you're operating in a shared responsibility model. But I mean, regardless of all of that, at the end of the day, if you're the organization that's collecting the personal data, you are the party that's responsible.
Okay. So basically, who is
Example.
collecting the data? That particular
Yes,
person is liable.
exactly.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarification.
Okay. So I was talking about the enterprise control tower. This would need visibility and accountability. You would need to have some sort of resilience to showcase that you are actually compliant with the law that's there, and this should give you some flexibility to innovate. Right? If it's all compliance and no innovation, I think we fail to strive towards a better ecosystem or a better economy in general. So what I will do from here onwards, it give you a glimpse into Privy by Idify that we have built. In fact, we have been building this for close to 2.5 years now. From a maturity standpoint, we are way ahead of what other tools or other providers have been in the market for quite some time. So love to give you a sneak peek into this, get your thoughts on this. So just to introduce Privy or Idify. Next slide, Rahul. Yeah. As an organization, we have been in this space for fraud, risk, governance, and compliance for close to 15 years as of now. We have some international presence in Southeast Asia and Middle East. Good amount of clients. We have served close to 3,000 clients as of now. Some of those are 500 of those are active clients. In terms of scale, we do close to 70 million verifications per month. In terms of employee strength, we are 800 employees as of now. Most of my team sits here in Marol, and close to 100 people are in Bangalore. Next slide, Rahul. Yes, in terms of the clients that we have served, so we've served most of the heavily regulated sectors in the country: banking, NBFCs, fintechs, insurance, e-commerce. All of these have been my customers. All of the big logos you could think of, say HDFC Bank, Axis, IndusInd, Amazon, PhonePe, Reliance. All of these have been my customers at some point of time. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. So all of my experience in fraud, risk, privacy, and governance has sort of come about in these three platforms. Privy is most relevant to our conversation here. It's a complete end-to-end suite for privacy and data governance, which helps you cater to your DPDP compliance challenges. Uh, I'd just like to touch up a little bit on onboard IQ and OneRisk as well. Onboard IQ is where we help organizations onboard customers, companies, merchants, and employees, right? So it's a low code, no code platform where you could create custom onboarding journeys and onboard all of these types of people. So just to give you an example, HUL uses this to onboard Kirana store owners. Zomato uses this to onboard delivery riders. When you have to open a digital bank account with HDFC Bank, you have to get your video KYC done. So that also is being powered by Onboard IQ platform. Next is OneRisk. OneRisk is where we help assess risks around individuals, entities, and assets, right? So, one of the interesting use cases that we have found is when employers want to onboard employees, they want to do a ref check and they want to absolutely make sure that this particular employee doesn't have any sort of criminal case, court case pending against him or her in any corner of India. So, what we have done is that we have scoured through all of the e-court records, EFIRs, and created a structured queryable format where if you give me a name, father's name, some minimum details, I'll be able to figure out whether this person has criminal history in any corner of India, and that could be in any language, any shape or format. We do all of that scanning and scouring on our end, right? So there's just one example. There are close to 500 risk signals that we send to help you exhaustive or complete risk around individuals, entities, and assets. Privy, as I said, is privacy and data governance platform. We'll go deeper into Privy and explore all of the different modules.
Hey, Saman, there's another
Next,
question.
sure.
Can we address that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hi, Fazli sir. You can unmute yourself, sir.
Hi Rahul, hi Savan.
Hi.
Savan, PV has been a long-term partner. So just I wanted to know, let's say I onboard Privy, and I have a situation that my SAP is on public cloud, okay,
mhm.
and the edition what we have taken is like SAP Grow, which is SAP Public Cloud Edition, where I do not have an option to have choose my own cloud server. So where SAP
Okay.
enforces wherever they want, they can give the server in wherever, right? So
Right.
now, if in case, actually not in
Mhm.
case, actually happened, SAP choose to give me a server location which is out of India, which is like
Right.
in somewhere. Now, my all customer data, my all financial transaction with me, or my vendor data, my employee data, those are in SAP,
Mhm.
and all the financial transactions that I'm doing are residing in SAP's controlled server, which is now in not in India even. So,
Right.
what? How Privy would be able to help me in that case to not to be a defaulter in any terms of this DPDP Act?
Okay, so there are two aspects to this question. One is on the product side, and one is on the cross-border governance side. I'll first address the cross-border governance aspect. First is that DPDP Act itself does not prohibit any organization to store data outside of the country. What it basically says is that there will be a blacklist of countries when the India government of India comes up with a blacklist of countries. I, as a data fiduciary, have to make sure that my data principals data is not stored in those countries, right?
But
So
my question, am I data fiduciary here?
Uh, that would depend on a lot of factors. So, can you walk me through the scenario here a little bit on what's the
See,
exact business
how
model?
happens is when you opt for SAP's public edition, Grow mostly, then the customer of SAP do not have any option or any say wherein he can choose I will be host having my own cloud. So SAP gives as a bundled package as a software as a service with their own cloud server, and they can choose anyone. In our case, they have chosen GCP, okay, and they have hosted the server in what the server location what they have given to us is in Abu Dhabi.
Right.
Okay, so that's the scenario. Now my transaction has started. So in that transaction, I have my customer data, customer transactions, my vendor data, vendor transaction, employee transactions. Data means KYC data along with KYC data. So that's my
Right.
current situation. So I have anyway I have dropped a mail to SAPs asking clarity on this. If they are acting as my fiduciary or I would be the fiduciary, oh, they have to say something, or I would need to have written down something. Have till yet 2 weeks past they haven't responded yet anything. However, but in your because you are the expert in this area, so can you please help me? In any case, am I the fiduciary here or not? In normal terms, even if SAP says or not.
So you would be a fiduciary that, as I said, depend on a lot of factors. Say, for example, what data are you capturing? What is the purpose that you are capturing for? Are you acting as a data processor on some other data fiduciary's behalf? So I need to say understand this on a very deep level to give you some sort of
Okay.
understanding whether you are a data fiduciary or a data processor. But from a law perspective, I can definitely say that government of India will come up with blacklist of countries where Indian data principles should not be stored. As long
Okay.
as the end data wherever is it being stored is not in the blacklist of countries, your operations, I would say, wouldn't be affected. The second aspect is what Privy helps you with is that it gives you visibility into where all of that end data is stored. So we have built connectors that connect to all of your existing data assets and give you visibility that across the world where is that end data, even if you are using a SaaS platform, that would get stored, right? So whenever the blacklist updates or there is any change, the first step you would do is understand, okay, is my data in this XYZ location being affected? If yes, then do I need to say take certain actions? Do I need to shift the data? Do I need to ask, say, SAP to move that data from one location to another? So all of those things you can sort of undertake once you know where is that end data being stored.
So
That's
do
how
you help us
Privy
in that?
helps you.
Do, do you help your customer in that? Ki what action to be taken and what not for those things? Or is
No,
that you
not
just find out the where the data has been deciding, and then whatever action, whatever has to be done, we have to take a call ourselves, or you will be helping us in that. To take the action, you will be taking the action. But
right.
what action needs to be taken? Will you help us in that, or how is it?
I am not very sure about this because see, this depends on a lot of strategic factors also on what the on what the organization as a whole decides. What's the most strategic locations? So I, as a tool provider, don't really have any insight into the organization as to what's the organization thinking, what's their strategy like. But on a tool level, I would at least be able to give you visibility into where is all of that end data being stored.
Okay, 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 okay. Thank you.
Savan, there was one more question,
Mhm.
which is regarding how can we so if there are customers and vendors,
Right.
and our business relationship is ended, but we've kept each other's data for some kind of compliance. So is this, is there any kind of issue with this, or are we allowed to do this? Do we require consent again for this, or how would that work?
Again, this goes back to the fact that what type of agreement or what type of contract do you have with the data principal or the third party vendor? If that is covered, that you will be keeping this data for say 1 year for monitoring purpose or for any other compliance obligations, I would say it's fine. But if again you have to ensure that that particular data is not being utilized for purposes other than the mentioned in the contract or agreement, right? If you are sure of
Got
that, we can keep it safe for 1 year. Post than that, we will have to sort of have consent for it.
Got it. Got it. Then there was one last question here. How is the PII leak managed in case resumes are sent via emails, specifically regarding the unselected candidates? Because the selected candidates would be processed properly because they are
Mm.
being onboarded into the company. But what about the rest of the majority chunk of the resumes that the HR team receives?
Again, we have to make sure that we are looking at it from a data minimization perspective. If those resumes, the purpose has been met, ideally those resumes should be sort of deleted, right? Because they're not
Mm-hmm.
further required for any further purpose. The act is sort of very clear on this. If the purpose is not there, the data should not be utilized.
Got it. Got it. Hope that answers the question, Abhishek sir. I think we can continue, Seven. Should I move forward?
Yes. So, talking a little bit about our history with the DPDP Act itself, we started in 2018 when the Sri Krishna committee was formed. Our CEO, Mr. Ashok, he contributed to this committee in form of thought leadership papers, in form of white papers. And as and when the act has sort of rolled out, the tool has developed in tandem with it. We do a lot of community building activities. We understand this privacy space is quite new to India, but there have been GDPR regimes or CCPA in other parts of the world, right? So we do our fair share of contributing back to the community in form of WhatsApp. We have a very interesting Privy Times newspaper that comes out every often that gives that educates people around what is privacy, what is consent. Happy to float it around after the webinar session. Also, we have been core part to consultations and workshops with MITI, where all of this as to how would privacy work in India, how would consent management work in India, how would say parent-child consent work in India. We were a core part of we are a core contributor to those discussions as well. We also have some good partnerships in terms of ecosystem enablement. We are partnered with DSCI and we have launched a tool called Preview. Preview is a mock consent management tool wherein if you could go for your specific industry, for your specific use case, you could see how should the consent notice be displayed to the data principal, how should their consents be collected, how should the mapping from the user attribute to the business purpose be mapped should be displayed, and the consents be collected from the data principal, right? One thing I wanted to highlight is the NEGT code for consent challenge. So this was a challenge rolled on by METI, wherein they invited close to, I would say, 50 organizations throughout the country to come and build a consent management system in place. They released a BRD, and on top of this, these organizations were required to sort of compete and build a consent management solution. We have come out in the top six as per the last notification, and we're sort of proud to say that this gives us a nod from the government itself that this is the right way to think about it. This is the right way to think about consent and the data principles. So we'll be shaping the future of privacy in India from here onwards. So coming next, what I will do is I will play a small video that will give you a complete glimpse into what the solution is and how does it actually solve for DPDPA compliance. Just give me a minute. Rahul, can you play the video? This is not audible, Rahul.
DPDP Act requirements with modules for consent
Yeah, it's audible now.
lifecycle management, personal data discovery and governance, continuous compliance and risk management, tied together by Compliance Copilot. Enterprises can now capture and manage multilingual, purpose-specific consents across all customer journeys in real time with immutable audit trails. For data governance, Privy discovers, classifies and monitors personal data across structured and unstructured data sources and endpoints. This lets privacy teams know exactly where data lies, how it flows and who has access to it, thus ensuring secure data processing across internal and third-party systems. This enables proactive risk controls for enterprises. Privy ensures risk management by mapping data flows, flagging gaps, and conducting privacy impact assessments (PIAs). In case of breaches, Privy enables investigation, notifies data principals, and generates audit-ready reports. All modules work in perfect sync, giving DPOs a unified view of enterprise privacy and risk radar. Recognized by METI and trusted by leading enterprises, Privy already powers compliance at scale. The rules are here. We have everything you need to get compliant.
Yes, thanks, Rahul. So from module perspective, these are the 8 modules within Privy divided in 3 major buckets. So the first one talks about consent lifecycle management. Within this, there is consent governance platform. So this is where you will be able to generate a business process specific or a user journey specific consent notice. You'll be able to show it to the data principals, and then you will be able to capture those consents, store those consents, and use it for any downstream processing that might happen. Then there is data principal rights management. So the act has given the data principal rights to come back to you and ask for, say, consent revocation, data deletion, any kind of other processing inquiry. So you will be able to do that from the data principal rights management portal. Cookie manager is something particularly for websites and mobile applications. So whenever a data principal lands, certain pieces of information like browser ID, browser type, IP location, all of those are collected. To manage consents for that, we have cookies manager. So this is what consent lifecycle management looks like. Then there is continuous compliance and risk management. So what it talks about is significant data fiduciaries. They have to do impact assessment DPIAs and audits and report it back to the data protection board annually. Of course, large organizations, when they put up new products or they onboard a new data processor or read a new data asset, in those cases, they carry out a activity called PIA, Privacy Impact Assessments, in which they reach out to all of their important stakeholders, gather all of the risks, questionnaires that are there out of carrying this activity. What are the mitigation plan that need to be put in? So to create, rather than doing it on Excel, to create a workflow for that, we have the impact assessment module over here. Incident management is uh, how do you sort of react to breaches, right? From the DPDPA perspective, what are the few things that you have to do in order to ensure that there are no fines on you, right? You have to reach out to all of your data principals and to the data protection board that says as soon as possible. In that short amount of time, you have to ensure that you have sort of narrowed down who are the exact data principals who have been affected, who are the third party processors who could have been a part of the breach, who are the what are the data assets that have been affected, what are the business process again which have been affected, right? So incident management module does all of those for you. From a third party management, third party risk management, so as we have been talking about a lot about data processors, right? So when you are a data fiduciary, all of the obligations lie on you as a fiduciary to ensure that the data is purged from the data processor system when the purpose has been met or the consent has been revoked, right? So that's what the third party risk management module helps you do that. Data compass, this is what we suggest as a first step to the organization, that even before you do all of this, you sort of assess what personal data do you have on hand, right? Where is that personal data sitting, in what data asset, on cloud, on prem, in what endpoints, right? So this gives you visibility into across all of your different data assets. It helps you draw lineage, as in understand how are the data, different data assets configured, how are they talking to each other. It of course helps you with the DSPM techniques also. If you want to tokenize, anonymize data, there are a lot of DSPM techniques that we have sort of baked in the data compass bit to help you not just discover the data, but put up security safeguards or control around your existing data. The last bottom layer is the piece that binds all of these different modules together. So there's a huge AI layer that we have developed that does all of these things. So from the contract analysis part, it will go into all of your contracts. It will find out whether there are any clauses that are non-existent to or non-compliant in non-compliance to DPDP Act. Those need to be changed, or if something else needs to be added. If you had to go through 1,000 contracts, this will shorten the that for you over there. It will also help in your gap assessment. So any new user journeys that are being launched, you can use this as a tool to judge all of those journeys. What sort of PI are you collecting? How should the notice for that journey look like? Again, from a assessment perspective, what are the questions you should be asking when these PI are being collected, right? So it auto generates a privacy impact assessment for you right from there. So this was a small overview of what is Privy all about. Happy to take any questions. I think we've overshot by a little bit, but yeah. Any questions that you might have? No questions?
Hey Arun, hey Savan. Arun has a question regarding the pricing mechanism, the tool. So if you can give us a quick
Yeah,
heads
so
up on
that
how that works.
depends on a lot of factors. That depends on the deployment model. That depends on the number of data principles that you want to capture consent for. That depends on the data size that you want to scan. That again depends on the number of modules you want to take. It's a yearly license model basically, but the amount of that gets decided on all of these factors.
Yeah, definitely, Arun. We'll connect with you, and we can definitely share Ravi's contacts with you. Please feel free to ask any other questions if you have anything.
Okay, if there are no questions, I think, yeah, I'll just cover this bit. Oh, there's a lot of confusion in the market. How would consent managers work? Because the data protection board will give out licenses for these consent managers, and how will they interact with me as a fiduciary, right? So whatever you saw about Privy, we were talking about a consent governance platform that sits within the fiduciary, right? So that sits tightly coupled with the fiduciary. Any customer or data principal could again choose to come to you directly, give their consents on Privy, and could directly interact with you. But what the data protection board has tried to done is sort of democratize this consent sharing and consent revocation, the whole consent mechanism in general, for which they've introduced entities called consent managers. Now, these consent managers will be a completely different entity who for whose license will be given out by the data protection board. What and how is that important for you is that you, as a citizen of India or a data principal, you could say download this app, consent manager app. You would be able to see all of the various different consents that you have shared with various different data fiduciaries. So say for example, I could download Privy's consent manager. Again, this would be entirely different from the consent governance platform that I have. I would say if I download Privy's consent manager, and I would be able to see that I have shared my consent with, say, Zomato for marketing purpose, or say with Indigo again for flight tracking purpose, right? For boarding pass purpose, any of those things. So this will be citizen facing applications where you would be able to see all of your consents. You'll be able to manage all of those consents right from the consent manager itself. So these are the two, I would say, important things over here. People often confuse between a consent manager and a consent management platform. Hope I was able to clarify it.
Seven, there's one more question by Milind. How does the consent management tool work? So,
Right. So I would say it works on various different ways. First is, Rahul, can you bring up the notice that I shared with you? I think that would help a lot.
okay, okay. All right. I'll just look for that. Maybe we can go through this till then. Just give
Sure.
me a
So
second. I'll just look
basically,
for
what
it.
happens if, as part of customer onboarding, you could be asking your customer in different things, right? So that could be, say, I am asking your mobile number for the purpose of KYC. I am asking your email ID for the purpose of, say, marketing, right? So when the customer is getting onboarded, you as a data fiduciary share a notice to the data principal that these are the five different attributes I would be using for these XYZ purposes. Now, for carrying out something like marketing, which is not a legitimate use, I would need to capture consents from you. Right. So the data principal, as part of their user journey, would be able to see that notice, share their consents, and then these consents again would be stored in a consent vault. Whenever a marketing activity needs to happen, you'll go and hit that consent vault, check whether the consent for these activities are available or not. Then you'll be able to carry out that downstream processing in a consent compliant manner.
Yeah, there's one more question. If someone develops their own business partner KYC application in the same as a digital consent section is added, having Aadhaar-based OTP agreement, will it suffice, or would we need something more than that?
So it depends. First, if you're developing something in-house, so your data doesn't need to flow out. But what we have to sort of make sure is OTP based consents usually don't work because from the DPDP Act perspective, it sort of forces you to capture granular purpose specific consent. So in OTP based manner, what usually happens, we capture a blanket consent for everything, right? You check this box and I'll be able to do n number of things that I want with your data, which is not the case under DPDP Act. You have to give granular purpose specific consent. So there's a good example that Rahul is sharing. There are few required purposes which are required to provide a given product or service to the end data principal, without which I as a data fiduciary cannot provide that given product or service. So these becomes mandatory consent or sort of legitimate use. But if you were to scroll down, Rahul, there is a section of optional consents for which I can only do a consent based processing. So the data principal will be able to share consent for these activities, right? So again, this notice gets embedded as part of the user journey. Say when the user is signing up for a bank account opening, they are signing up for investor onboarding on a mobile app or on a website. This notice gets popped up. The data principal can share their consents from there. Of course, there is a specific notice that you have to design for that journey, which captures consent during that specific journey itself.
So we just say yes here. So intention is there.
All right. So this is the data principal rights management portal where the data principals will be able to see these consents. If you click on that 11 number over there, yes, these are the various different active consents that they have shared. If you want to revoke your consent, you can go back to the main page and revoke those consents.
And you can get a consent to see it. Okay.
Yeah,
Hey,
actually,
Savan, you are on mute.
hi, Savan. Actually, what I meant was what we actually follow every year. What we say re KYC. In that, what we also declare a list of documents what we take from them, do online verification, and we at every KYC document like email, mobile number, Aadhaar, PAN card, whatever. It's not a blanket type of partner wise type of document we do, and in that we also let them know as of now. The but yeah, I'll say the but part later. What we let them know is we are going to share it. Let's say we have some other partner who does the online verification. There's an API. That means that there's another partner. I share their data. We always let them know that this is going to be shared with my third party partner for verification on real time basis when they upload the data, right? But only thing, as you mentioned, as in previous slides, and Rahul also mentioned that there is also part in DPTP that we have to also take their. They can anytime come back and say, I don't want to give the consent anymore. The termination of the consent, that part we didn't have till yet. But for now, what we have every year we ask them to re-upload their KYC, and every time we say if there is a new partner change, we let them know which partner we are sharing their data with. So for let's say branding and marketing team, we share them with them. We are sharing your data with this partner who will be giving the schemes, right? That kind of application we have. But only thing is we do not have as of now any revoking of acceptance of any time in the between the year. That part we don't have. So will that suffice by adding that revoking part, or that even that whole? I'm just asking from the part of being a DPO. Say I'm the DPO. I have to manage my all the data when, let's say, in the government audits or something happens, something complains. Is this form of information or and the set of information sufficient for being a data fiduciary, or I have to do something more than this? You are on mute, Savan.
Savan, you're on mute. Sir, if I may, so the act and the rules are very clear in this, that the ease at which an individual can give data, it has to be an equivalent ease by which the individual can revoke or change anything for which they have given consent. So if you do not have that revoking part so far, then definitely you would need that. Without that, you will not be compliant. And Savan, if you have something to
Yeah,
add,
just
please.
to add on top, Rahul. So as an organization, sir, I feel you would have to carry out an activity to help you ascertain what are the various different kinds of processing that you do. KYC could be one, marketing could be one. What are the other different various activities or processing that you do? Right? Lay it down on a sort of sheet of paper, figure out which are the legitimate use that I do, and what are the few consent based activities or processing that I need to do for which I need to capture consent. If you have KYC, it's well documented, great. If you have marketing explicit consent, opt in consent from the data principal where they are actively giving you the permission to do marketing, great. But is that list complete? I don't feel it's limited to just KYC and marketing. There could be a number of processing activities you are doing for which some of those consent would need to be captured. Again, as you added, the data principal should be able to come back and revoke or manage any of those consents or put up any processing query for which you should have the answer as to how is this being processed.
All right, with that, thank you all for your valuable time. Hope this webinar was insightful and educational in some regard. And I will share the deck along with the connects for Savan and Nikhil to all of you guys post this webinar. And again, thank you so much to Savan and Nikhil for joining us and providing their insights for the same. And all the participants and attendees, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate that a lot. And thank you again. Have a very special day for Pongal or Makar Sankranti or whichever harvest festival that you celebrate. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Milind.